For over 100 years, people have talked about the Bermuda Triangle like it's some kind of cursed spot in the ocean. Books have been written, movies have been made. Everyone seemed to have a wild theory about what was happening there. But here's the twist. Scientists have been quietly checking the facts, and what they found is pretty surprising. Where is this place anyway? The Bermuda Triangle isn't even a real place on maps. You won't find it labeled on any official ocean chart. It doesn't have exact borders that everyone agrees on. It's just a chunk of the Atlantic Ocean that people say is somewhere between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Some people say it's about 500,000 square miles. Others say it's more like 1,500,000 square miles. That's a difference of 1,000,000 square miles. That's huge. The shape isn't even really a triangle. Depending on who you ask, it could be shaped more like a diamond or just a blob. The United States doesn't recognize it as a real location. The U.S. Board on Geographic Names refuses to put it on official maps. Why? Because there's nothing special about it that makes it different from any other part of the ocean. But that hasn't stopped the stories. The stories have been going strong for centuries. It all started with Columbus. The year was 1492. Christopher Columbus was sailing across the Atlantic Ocean trying to find a new route to Asia. He ended up finding America instead, but that's another story. On his way there, Columbus sailed through what we now call the Bermuda Triangle. He was probably the first European to do that and come back to tell people about it. Columbus wrote in his journal that something weird was happening to his compass. He said the compass was pointing in the wrong direction. One morning it pointed one way, and later it pointed another way. For sailors back then, this was scary stuff. The compass was their main tool for finding their way across the ocean. He also wrote about seeing strange lights on the water. He described them as looking like a small candle rising and lifting up. He said the sea was rising to great heights in unusual ways. Now think about this. This was 1492. America hadn't even been discovered yet. Most people didn't know much about the world. The ocean was full of mystery. So when Columbus came back and told these stories, people listened. People wondered, and people started to get a little scared of that area. The ships start disappearing. Fast forward to the year 1800. A ship called the USS Pickering left Delaware and headed south. It was carrying 91 people. The ship was supposed to meet up with other Navy ships in the West Indies. The USS Pickering never made it. Nobody ever saw it again. All 91 people were lost. People thought a big storm probably sank it sometime in September, but nobody knew for sure. There was no wreckage found, no survivors, nothing. In that same storm, another ship called the USS Insurgent also vanished, just gone. Then in 1840, something even stranger happened. Sailors found a ship floating in the ocean with nobody on it. There was a cat, some chickens, and some canaries on board. The animals were half-starved and scared. The ship was full of nice food, expensive wine, and fancy silk cloth. The cabins were comfortable and clean, so where did everyone go? There's some confusion about this story. Some people say the ship was called the Rosalie. Others say it was the Rossini. It turns out there might have been two different ships, and over the years, the stories got mixed up. One group of travelers was eventually found in Cuba. They had left their ship on purpose because it got stuck on some rocks. But the story stuck in people's minds. An abandoned ship, no crew, just scared animals. It sounds like the start of a ghost story. The ghost ship that took two crews. One of the creepiest stories happened in 1881. An Ellen ship called the Ellen Austin was sailing from Liverpool to New York. The captain decided to take a shortcut through an area of the ocean called the Sargasso Sea. That's right in the middle of where the Bermuda Triangle is supposed to be. While they were sailing, they spotted another ship, but this ship wasn't moving right. Nobody was on deck. When they got closer, they realized there was no crew on the ship at all. But the ship wasn't empty. It was full of valuable stuff. Treasure, goods, things worth a lot of money. It's like someone had left bait out there, hoping someone would take it. The captain of the Ellen Austin saw a chance to make some money. He decided to take the ghost ship with them to New York. He sent some of his bravest sailors over to the other ship so they could sail both ships together. Everything seemed fine at first, but then a huge storm hit. The wind was howling, the waves were massive, the two ships got separated in the chaos. When the storm cleared, the Ellen Austin started looking for their friends. They finally spotted the other ship. The captain called out to his crew. No answer, just silence. Some sailors rowed over to check. Their friends were gone, vanished, not a single trace of what happened to them. The captain sent a second group of sailors to take the ship to New York. Maybe he really wanted that treasure. Maybe he didn't believe in ghost ships. For a few nights, both ships sailed together just fine. Then fog rolled in. Thick, heavy fog. The kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face. The Ellen Austin had to stop and wait for the fog to clear. When it finally did, the ghost ship was gone again. And so was the second crew. Nobody ever saw them or the ship again. This story is pretty cool, but we need to check if it's true. There really was a ship called the Ellen Austin that sailed between Liverpool and New York. That part is true. But here's the thing. Lloyd's of London kept records of all ship journeys back then. They were like the insurance company for ships. Their records say the Ellen Austin's journey in 1881 went fine. No problems, no ghost ships, no missing crews. So did this story really happen, or did someone make it up? We don't know for sure, but it's a good story, and people still tell it today. The biggest naval disaster. Let's jump ahead to 1918. World War I was happening. A huge Navy cargo ship called the USS Cyclops was carrying supplies. This wasn't a small boat. It was 542 feet long. That's almost 2 football fields. The ship had over 300 people on board. It was also carrying 10,000 tons of manganese ore. That's a type of metal used to make steel. The USS Cyclops left Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. It was heading to Baltimore in Maryland. It made an unplanned stop in Barbados. Nobody thought much of it at the time. Then the ship headed north. And that's the last anyone ever saw of it. Here's what makes this so strange. The ship had a radio. It could send out distress signals. If something was going wrong, the captain could call for help, but no distress signal was ever sent. Not one. The Navy searched and searched. They sent out other ships to look for wreckage. They found nothing. Not a piece of wood, not a life jacket, nothing. This was the biggest loss of life in U.S. Navy history that didn't happen in a battle. Over 300 people just vanished. President Woodrow Wilson, who was president at the time, said something that people still quote today. He said, "Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship." A magazine in 1920 tried to describe what might have happened. They wrote that the ship disappeared as if some giant monster of the sea had grabbed it and dragged it down to the bottom of the ocean. But wait, it gets weirder. In 1941, 2 other ships that were exactly like the USS Cyclops also disappeared. They were called sister ships because they were built the same way. They vanished on almost the same route. They were also carrying heavy metal ore. 3 identical ships, all carrying the same type of cargo, all vanished on the same route. No wreckage ever found. Scientists today think they know what happened. The ships were probably carrying too much weight. The heavy ore might have made the ships unstable. They might have just broken apart and sunk really fast. That would explain why there were no distress calls. It would have happened too quickly. But back then, people didn't know that. They just knew 3 big Navy ships had vanished like magic. When the planes started vanishing too. For a long time, the Bermuda Triangle stories were all about ships, but then something happened that changed everything. Planes started disappearing too. December 5th, 1945, 5 Navy torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale in Florida. These were big planes called TBM Avengers. They were on a training mission, just practice, nothing dangerous. There were 14 airmen total flying these 5 planes. The mission was simple. Fly east for 141 miles, turn north for 73 miles, then fly back home. Easy. But things went wrong fast. The leader of the group was named Lieutenant Charles Taylor. His compass stopped working correctly, or at least he thought it did. He got confused about where they were. He radioed back to base. His message was clear. He said, "We cannot be sure where we are." 20 minutes later, for reasons nobody understands, Taylor gave command to someone else. Then came the final message anyone ever heard from Flight 19. The words were chilling. "It looks like we are entering white water. We are completely lost." All 5 planes just flew around and around until they ran out of fuel. Then they had to crash into the ocean. The Navy immediately sent out a rescue plane. It was called a PBM Mariner, and it had 13 crew members on board. That rescue plane also disappeared. A ship in the area reported seeing an explosion and a big oil spillage on the water. The Navy searched for a whole week. They looked everywhere. They found nothing. No planes, no bodies, no wreckage. The official report said it was as if the planes had flown to Mars. This is when the Bermuda Triangle really became famous. 5 military planes and a rescue plane, all gone in one day. 27 men vanished. Years later, people found the actual radio transcripts from that day. They could read exactly what Lieutenant Taylor said. It turns out Taylor thought his compass was broken. He believed he was flying over the Florida Keys. The Florida Keys are islands that go southwest from Florida. But he wasn't over the Florida Keys. He was actually near the Bahamas, which are southeast of Florida. So when he tried to fly back west to Florida, he was actually flying east, deeper into the Atlantic Ocean. Scientists later found out something else. Lieutenant Taylor had gotten lost before. An Australian scientist named Karl Kruszelnicki looked into Taylor's record. Taylor had navigation problems on earlier flights too. So what happened to Flight 19? Most likely the pilot got confused and flew in the wrong direction. Human error, not a mystery. Just a tragic mistake that cost 27 lives. But in 1945, people didn't know all that. They just knew planes could now disappear in the Bermuda Triangle, just like ships. More planes go missing. In 1948, a British passenger plane disappeared while flying from the Azores to Bermuda. About 30 people were on board. The plane was called the Star Tiger. Nobody ever found it. Just 1 year later, another British plane called the Star Ariel vanished. It was flying from Bermuda to Jamaica, same type of plane as the Star Tiger, also never found. Both of these planes were flying at the very edge of how far they could go. If anything went wrong, even something small, they wouldn't have enough fuel to reach land. But people didn't talk about that. They talked about the mystery. In December 1948, a passenger plane called a Douglas DC-3 disappeared between Puerto Rico and Miami. There were 32 people on board. No trace of them was ever found. The investigation couldn't even figure out what probably happened. They just said there wasn't enough information. Back then, planes were still pretty new. Flying was scary for a lot of people, and now planes were vanishing over the ocean without any explanation. It's no wonder people started making up wild theories. Someone gives it a name. All these disappearances happened over many years. Ships in the 1800s, more ships in the early 1900s, planes in the 1940s and 1950s, but nobody had connected them all together yet. Nobody had given this area a name. That changed in February 1964. A writer named Vincent Gaddis wrote an article for a magazine called Argosy. The article was called The Deadly Bermuda Triangle. In the article, Gaddis said something important. He told people to draw a line from Florida to Bermuda, then draw another line from Bermuda to Puerto Rico, then draw a third line back to Florida. He said most of the disappearances happened inside that triangle. Boom, the Bermuda Triangle is born. Actually, the idea started a bit earlier. In 1950, a writer for the Miami Herald noticed something odd about ship disappearances in that area. Other writers picked up on it too, but Gaddis was the one who really made it famous. People went crazy for this idea. Suddenly, all these separate mysteries were connected. It wasn't just bad luck or random accidents. There was a pattern, a triangle of doom. The timing was perfect too. This was the 1960s during the Cold War. Americans and Russians were pointing nuclear weapons at each other. The Cuban Missile Crisis had just happened. People were used to conspiracy theories and secrets. NASA was exploring space and answering big questions about the universe, but here was something even NASA couldn't explain. People loved it. The books that changed everything. Other writers jumped on the Bermuda Triangle idea fast. They wrote books, lots of books, and some of these books sold millions and millions of copies. The biggest one was written by a man named Charles Berlitz in 1974. His book was just called The Bermuda Triangle. It sold 20 million copies. It was translated into more than 30 languages. That's incredible for any book, especially a book about a supposedly cursed patch of ocean. Berlitz didn't hold back. He came up with some really wild theories, and I mean wild. He said the Bermuda Triangle was connected to Atlantis, the lost city that sank under the ocean. Berlitz said Atlantis was real and it was somewhere in the Bermuda Triangle. He claimed it was pulling ships and planes down into the water. He also said aliens might be involved. He pointed out that most of the missing ships and planes never sent out distress calls, they just disappeared. Berlitz said this proved something supernatural or extraterrestrial was happening. How else could everything just vanish so fast? He even suggested the triangle might be some kind of portal, like a doorway to another dimension or another time. Ships and planes weren't sinking, they were being transported somewhere else entirely. These ideas were so popular that when Steven Spielberg made his famous movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, he showed the Flight 19 crew being abducted by aliens. That's how much Berlitz's book influenced popular culture. People ate it up. The wilder the theory, the better. Nothing was too crazy to consider. People who said they survived it. After Gaddis's article and Berlitz's book came out, people started coming forward with their own stories. A man named Gerard Hawkes wrote a letter to Vincent Gaddis. Hawkes said he had flown through the Bermuda Triangle on a flight to Bermuda. During the flight, the plane suddenly dropped 200 feet, just fell like it was in an elevator shaft in the sky. Then it shot back up again, like an invisible hand had lifted it. The pilot couldn't find Bermuda. The radio operator couldn't contact anyone. They flew around blind until they finally made radio contact with a ship. Only then could they find the island. Hawk said when they landed, the weather was perfectly clear. Stars were out, no wind, it was beautiful, but they had just flown through chaos. He said it felt like being caught in an area where time and space just disappeared. Another person claimed they flew 340 miles in the time it should have taken to fly only 200 miles, like the plane had traveled through some kind of time warp. These stories made everything seem even more mysterious. It wasn't just ships and planes disappearing. Now people who made it through were reporting weird things happening. Compasses going crazy, planes dropping hundreds of feet for no reason, traveling farther than they should have been able to. The wild theories. With so many books being written and so many people interested, the theories got more and more creative. Some people said there were magnetic vortexes in the Bermuda Triangle. These vortexes would mess up all the equipment on ships and planes. Compasses would spin wildly, radios would stop working, engines might even shut off. Others believed in whirlpools, giant whirlpools that could suck down an entire ship. The Atlantis theory was really popular. People said the lost city had some kind of ancient technology that was still working under the water. This technology was interfering with modern ships and planes. UFO believers had aliens were using the Bermuda Triangle as a collection spot. They would abduct humans straight from the sea and sky for experiments. Some people thought magnetic vortexes were actually attracting UFOs to the area. There was even a story about a US Navy experiment in 1943. It was called the Philadelphia experiment. According to the story, the Navy was trying to make a ship invisible using magnetic fields. The USS Eldridge supposedly disappeared in a green light, then reappeared 1,000 miles in Virginia. Some crew members died, others went insane. People connected this to the Bermuda Triangle, saying it proved magnetic vortexes could make things disappear. Most scientists will tell you the Philadelphia experiment is just an urban legend, but it got mixed up with the Bermuda Triangle stories anyway. What science actually says. Okay, so we've heard all the spooky stories and wild theories. Now let's talk about what scientists actually found when they studied the Bermuda Triangle. First, let's talk about compasses. Columbus said his compass was acting weird back in 1492. Other people have said the same thing. Here's how a compass works. Inside a compass is a little magnetic needle. That needle is pulled toward the Earth's magnetic North Pole. The magnetic North Pole and the true North Pole are not in the same place. They're actually about 1,200 miles apart. The difference between magnetic north and true north is called magnetic declination. This difference changes depending on where you are on Earth. Sailors and pilots have known about this for hundreds of years. They have to adjust their compasses all the time. There's also something called an agonic line. That's an invisible line on Earth where magnetic north and true north line up perfectly. Back in the 1700s, a scientist named Edmund Halley noticed this line was slowly moving west. It moves about 0.2 degrees per year. Some people claimed the Bermuda Triangle was special because the agonic line passed through it. They said this is why compasses would malfunction there. But guess what? The agonic line doesn't even go through the Bermuda Triangle anymore. It moved. Now it's over the Gulf of Mexico. And anyway, experienced pilots and ship captains know all about magnetic declination. They know how to adjust for it. It's part of basic navigation. So the idea that everyone was just getting confused by their compasses doesn't make much sense. The weather is actually terrible there. Here's something nobody really talks about in the scary stories. The Bermuda Triangle has some of the worst weather in the world. Hurricane season goes right through the middle of it. Huge tropical storms form there all the time. And back in the old days, before weather satellites, ships had no warning when a hurricane was coming. They would just sail right into it. Since 1851, Florida has been hit by hurricanes more than any other state. Puerto Rico gets hit by hurricanes about 4 or 5 times every year. Bermuda gets a bad hurricane every 6 or 7 years, and smaller storms even more often. The first recorded hurricane disaster in the area was in 1502. A Spanish fleet commanded by Francisco de Bobadilla got destroyed by a hurricane. This stuff has been happening for over 500 years. There's also something called the Gulf Stream. It's like a river inside the ocean. It moves really fast, about 4 or 5 knots per hour in some places. That's 300 times faster than the Amazon River. If a ship's captain doesn't know about the Gulf Stream, it can push the ship hundreds of miles off course. The Gulf Stream can also erase evidence really fast. If a ship sinks, the current just sweeps away all the debris. That's why searchers often couldn't find any wreckage. Then there are rogue waves. These are freak waves that can reach 100 feet tall. They're real. Scientists have measured them. The first one ever recorded with instruments was in 1995 in the North Sea. It was 84 feet tall. They called it the Drowner wave. Rogue waves happen about once every 10,000 waves. They're rare, but they're real, and they can sink a ship really fast. In 1986, a ship called the Pride of Baltimore sank because of something called a downdraft. That's when cold air from high up suddenly slams down onto the water's surface. A weather expert named James Lushine explained it like this. He said, during unstable weather, a downdraft can hit the surface like a bomb. It explodes outward like a giant wall of wind and water. The crew of the Pride of Baltimore said the wind went from 20 miles per hour to 90 miles per hour in seconds. Nobody had time to react. So you've got hurricanes, the Gulf Stream, rogue waves, and downdrafts. The Bermuda Triangle is basically a perfect recipe for disaster. And that's just natural weather. No aliens or portals needed. The Methane Theory. In 2016, some scientists in Norway found something interesting. They discovered huge craters on the ocean floor off the coast of Norway. These craters were up to half a mile wide and 150 meters deep. The scientists said the craters were caused by methane gas. Methane gets trapped in sediments at the bottom of the ocean. Sometimes a lot of it releases all at once. It's like a giant burp from the ocean floor. Some people immediately connected this to the Bermuda Triangle. Russian scientist Igor Yeltsov and others said maybe methane burps were sinking ships there. Here's how it would work. If enough methane bubbles up through the water, it makes the water less dense. It gets frothy and bubbly. A ship floating on normal water would suddenly sink if the water turned into foam. It would drop like a stone. Methane could also affect planes. If enough methane gets into the air, it makes the atmosphere really turbulent. A plane flying through it might crash. Scientists in Australia did experiments. They proved that bubbles really can sink a model ship by making the water less dense, so the theory works in a lab. The U.S. Geological Survey says there are big stores of methane under the ocean in lots of places, including near the southeastern United States. That's right near the Bermuda Triangle. The same scientists say there haven't been any big methane releases in the Bermuda Triangle for the past 15,000 years. So while it's possible, it's really, really unlikely. Most scientists think the methane theory is interesting, but probably not the answer. It's one of those things that could maybe explain one or two incidents, but not all of them. The man who solved it. In 1975, a researcher named Larry Cushay decided to actually check all the Bermuda Triangle stories. He wrote a book called The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved. Cushay did something simple but brilliant. He went back and read old newspapers from the dates when ships and planes disappeared. He looked at weather reports, he interviewed people who were actually there, he checked official records. What he found was shocking. A lot of the stories were wrong, just flat out wrong. Charles Berlitz, who wrote that best-selling book, had made tons of mistakes. Sometimes he said a ship disappeared in calm weather, when weather records clearly showed there was a huge storm. Sometimes he said ships vanished without a trace, when they actually did leave wreckage behind. Cushay found that a lot of disappearances didn't even happen in the Bermuda Triangle. Writers had stretched the boundaries to include them. Remember, the triangle doesn't have official borders, so writers could just claim anything they wanted was inside it. He also found cases where ships were reported missing but then showed up fine a few days later. The writers would report the disappearance but forget to mention the ship came back. One of Cushay's best examples was about a yacht owner named Donald Crowhurst. Berlitz presented Crowhurst's disappearance as a great mystery, but Cushay found clear evidence about what really happened. It wasn't a mystery at all. Another example, Berlitz wrote about a ship carrying ore that vanished 3 days out of an Atlantic port. Sounds spooky, right? Except Cushay found out the ship actually sank 3 days out of a Pacific Ocean port that just happened to have the same name. Wrong ocean entirely. Cushay even found a plane that Berlitz said disappeared mysteriously in 1937. Turns out that plane crashed right off Daytona Beach in front of hundreds of people. Not mysterious at all. After looking at everything, Cushay came to some conclusions. He said the number of ships and planes that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle was not higher than anywhere else in the ocean. The area has a lot of tropical storms, so of course there are accidents, but they're not mysterious or supernatural. He said Berlitz and other writers either made mistakes on purpose or just did really sloppy research. They used faulty reasoning and sensationalism. They took normal accidents and made them sound like supernatural mysteries. Cushay's final line in his book was powerful. He wrote that the legend of the Bermuda Triangle is a manufactured mystery. It was created by writers who either didn't check their facts or didn't care about the truth. What the experts say. After Cushay's book came out, other serious organizations started weighing in. In 1992, a British TV program asked Lloyd's of London about the Bermuda Triangle. Lloyd's is one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. They insure ships. If the Bermuda Triangle was really dangerous, Lloyd's would charge extra money to insure ships going through there. But they don't. Lloyd's said they looked at their records and lots of ships have not sunk in the Bermuda Triangle. They charge the same rates there as anywhere else. The U.S. Coast Guard also spoke up. They said they have tons of documentation about incidents in that area. When they actually investigate, the mysteries disappear. Ships sink because of bad weather or human error, not because of anything supernatural. The Coast Guard even talked about a specific case. In 1972, a tanker called the VA Fog exploded and sank. The Coast Guard took pictures of the wreck, then recovered bodies. But a Triangle writer claimed all the bodies vanished except for the captain, who was supposedly found sitting at his desk holding a coffee cup. The Coast Guard basically said that was nonsense. Also, the VA Fog sank off the coast of Texas, nowhere near the Bermuda Triangle anyway. In 1976, a science show called Nova made an episode about the Bermuda Triangle. They were very direct. They said when you go back to the original sources and talk to the people who were actually there, the mystery goes away. Ships and planes behave in the triangle the same way they behave everywhere else in the world. NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, put out an official statement. They said there's no evidence that disappearances happen more often in the Bermuda Triangle than in any other busy part of the ocean. Even the U.S. Coast Guard said there are no supernatural explanations for disasters at sea. They said nature and human error are way more powerful than any science fiction story. The real numbers. Okay, let's look at actual data. Real numbers, not stories, but facts. There's a database called the Marine Casualty and Pollution Data for Researchers. It has records of over 150,000 incidents from 1982 to 2015. That's 33 years of data. Out of all those incidents, about 9,000 were serious enough to analyze. Of those 9,000, only 361 happened in the Bermuda Triangle. That's just 4%. And here's the really important part. Between 1982 and 2015, there were 0 incidents classified as mysterious disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. 0, not 1. A YouTuber named Johnny Harris got shipping data from Lloyd's List for the year 2021. Lloyd's List is a global shipping publication that tracks every ship's journey. In 2021, about 1.88% of all ships in the entire world had some kind of problem during their voyage. That includes everything from minor accidents to complete disappearances. In the Bermuda Triangle that year, 8,634 ships passed through. Only 2 had any kind of problem. That's 0.02%. According to this data, the Bermuda Triangle is actually 90 times safer than the average ocean. Lloyd's of London and the U.S. Coast Guard both say the number of ships that go missing in the Bermuda Triangle is the same as anywhere else on a percentage basis. Over the past 10 years, ship accidents worldwide have actually gone down by 70%, and the Bermuda Triangle doesn't even show up on the list of problem areas. The most dangerous waters are around South China, Indonesia, and the Philippines. The second most dangerous area is the East Mediterranean and Black Sea. The Bermuda Triangle doesn't even make the top 10. In 2013, the World Wildlife Fund did a big study. They identified the 10 most dangerous bodies of water in the world for shipping. The Bermuda Triangle wasn't on the list. What about planes? The National Transportation Safety Board keeps a database of every plane accident from 1962 to now. This includes commercial planes and military planes. The data shows the same thing as the ship data. Most plane incidents in the area happen during takeoff and landing, mostly in the Bahamas. Very few incidents happen during actual flights. The only commercial plane accident was blamed on bad weather and poor decisions by the pilot. Since 1965, there has been exactly 1 aviation incident over Bermuda. 1. A JetBlue flight hit some bad turbulence and 1 person got hurt. That's it. So what really happened? If the Bermuda Triangle isn't cursed or supernatural, what really happened to all those ships and planes? Human error. That's the #1 cause according to official investigations. Remember Flight 19? The pilot thought his compass was broken, but it wasn't. He just didn't know where he was. He flew in the wrong direction until the planes ran out of fuel. An Australian scientist named Karl Kruszelnicki found out that same pilot had gotten lost before. It was a tragic mistake, but it was a human mistake. Bad weather explains a lot too. Before weather satellites, sailors and pilots had no idea when a hurricane was coming. They would sail or fly right into deadly storms. The area has shallow water and lots of reefs. Ships would hit these reefs and sank. There are over 300 shipwrecks around Bermuda. Most of them sank because they hit reefs, not because of anything mysterious. The Gulf Stream would sweep away wreckage, making it look like ships just vanished. But they didn't vanish, they sank, and the current just cleaned up the evidence. Some ships were overloaded. Remember the USS Cyclops and its 2 sister ships? They were all carrying really heavy ore. Scientists think the ships might have been carrying too much weight. The ships could have just broken apart and sunk really fast. That would explain why there were no distress calls. Rogue waves could sink a ship before the crew even knew what was happening. Modern technology has made everything safer. Ships now have sonar to map out safe routes through reefs. Weather satellites warn everyone when storms are coming. Better radios means ships can call for help faster. Navigation systems are way more accurate than old compasses. All of this is pretty boring compared to aliens and portals, but it's the truth. The Bermuda Triangle taught us an important lesson. It taught us to check our facts. It taught us not to believe every spooky story we hear. It taught us that the truth, even when it's ordinary, is better than a lie, even when it's exciting. And if you're ever on a ship or plane passing through the Bermuda Triangle, you can relax. You're just as safe there as you would be anywhere else. Maybe even safer since we've spent so much time studying the area. The curse has been lifted not by magic, but by science. And that's a pretty good ending to the story. Please subscribe for more videos like this.